All right, greetings and salutations, weary travelers. I'm Brian Snowman Powers, and here for another one of Snow's amazing videos. And today we are going to focus on sample replacing. We're going to do a kick drum and a floor tom today. I like to use raw samples from kits that I've personally recorded or other people have, that kind of thing. I find those work the best because they'll feel like a real drum kit, and they won't feel like they're a part of some library somewhere. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our kick drum here. I'm going to show you a couple of different methods today. Let's start with a method called drum rehab. This is my personal favorite, and drum rehab is made by TL Audio, which is now owned by Avid, and it's a real-time plugin that will work if you just leave it on the track, but because of certain technical glitches that do occur sometimes with this particular plugin, we like to just go ahead and print it down on a separate track right away. So one of the first steps I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new track. Flip over to our mixing window. And what we want to do is we want to bus the output of the original kick track to the input of the kick sample track so that we can record from one track to the other. So I'm going to come to the output of the original kick track. I'm going to set it to bus 1 and 2, or actually bus 1 because it's mono. And then I'm going to take the input of the sample track and also put it to bus 1. That way I have routed the output of this track to the input of this one. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring on my drum rehab plugin. And it can be found under instruments. By the way, drum rehab I know comes free with Pro Tools HD. I'm not sure about Pro Tools Standard, but it does come free with Pro Tools HD. There's drum rehab. Okay, a few things to know about the plugin. The first thing we want to do is load up our sample. And if you look here, we have up to 16 different zones we can create for any one sample or any one track, which means that I can load up to 16 different samples into this and set them all to trigger at different thresholds. You can see right now it's set to 4, and I've got 4 different zones here. I can load a different sample into each zone. What that allows me to do is have like a loud, a soft, or a medium, drum sample. It's usually more accurate or more natural to have different levels of hits. For example, a drum getting hit soft, and that same drum getting hit medium, that same drum getting hit hard. That way, when as the drummer plays and hits their instruments with these different velocities, our samples can follow suit. You can also use, drum rehab has a great thing down here called dynamic, which allows us to have drum rehab follow the dynamics of how the drummer played that particular instrument. So when he plays it softer, the dynamics will kick in and it'll have it be less volume. So you can do that as well. So to get this set up, we're only going to use one sample today, so let's change the number of zones to 1. And I'm going to go over here where it says File on the right-hand side and Show All Volumes. That will show all volumes of hard drives that are on the computer. I'm going to double-click on mine. And I need to go down to Sounds and Samples. Now, you can't scroll through this, and you don't really see a scroll wheel or scroll bar, so you just click on the right side and pull down, and it scrolls everything down. So let's go to our Samples and Sounds. Let's go to Snow Samples. We'll do my kick number 3. All right, and let's go to the sample page of drum rehab, which looks like a little waveform there, and there's my sample that I've brought in. And you have a couple of choices. You can control the attack and the sustain of the sample, which means I can control where exactly within the sample the initial hit will happen. I can have it hit right at the beginning, or I can have it hit in the middle or toward the end. It gives you that kind of flexibility. Sustain is obviously you can trim the end of the sample, how long the sample will last. This can particularly be effective when applying to toms and that kind of thing. So here's my kick drum sample. It's loaded up. And next thing let's do over here on the settings page, which is this little guy with a check mark. The timeline buffer size, let's max this out at 50. That way you won't run into any trouble if your song is really long, especially. We want to make sure that drum rehab will see the whole song and that kind of thing. So, okay, so the first page up here up top, this is where we set the mode. We're going to come over here to the detection mode, set it to kick drum. and don't really need to worry about voicings or anything like that right now. A couple other things you need to look at is the threshold, which is this area here where it says minus 25 dB. In order to change this, you simply click on it and drag right or left, and that, of course, will set the sensitivity threshold. Okay? And that is how it triggers the sound. If you're getting too many triggers, simply turn your threshold down. If you're not getting enough, you can turn the threshold up. We also have an input, and this actually is the original sound, the dry, non-affected sound that we're actually replacing. You can combine that with the sample, whose lever is here, and do a blend of the two samples right here. But since we're putting it to a new track anyway, you don't really need to do that. So I'm actually going to turn the input or the original track all the way down. That way we're just hearing the new sample we're creating. And since I'm only using one sample today, I'm going to turn the dynamics up to about 80%. And that way it will follow, what the drummer is doing with the kick drum, not completely as far as dynamics, but about 80% of the way. In certain types of music, you want your kick drum to be a little bit less dynamic, depending on what that type of music is. So this way we'll have most of what he's doing, but we will preserve a little bit of that as well. So the next thing you want to do is come over to the second tab here. And here's where the crux of what we're going to be doing is, this is where we can see how drum rehab is triggering off of the original audio, and we can create new triggers. We can get rid of ones that maybe we don't want. We can do all that here. As you can see, you have add. We can even ignore false triggers and that kind of fun stuff. All the buttons about commit and uncommit have to do with, especially if you're adding triggers of your own, you can actually commit them all, and instead of reanalyzing every time the track is played, it'll just set that as whatever triggers it has created as what it's going to do, regardless of what it sees coming in after that. Again, quantize, not super worried about that. We'll do the 16th notes for now. And we're actually not on a grid anyway. Okay, so we're ready to go. Let's flip back to the edit window. We'll pull drum rehab down here. And we've got our two kick drum tracks, the original and the sample. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. And basically, we just got to go through the entire song and make sure that our sample triggers. And I'm actually going to set us up in Quick Punch, which is numeric 6. And let's just play and see if, make sure we're actually getting some sound here. All right, so I'm not seeing anything. Sometimes when you set up a plug-in, sometimes you need to actually reset it. Sometimes it'll kind of glitch. And how you reset a plug-in is you simply grab it and move it down to another insert, and it simply resets the plug-in. So let's go back. Oh, you know what it is actually, all right, Steve, can you edit this out here, right here? All right, so this is a little edit point. All right, so here we go back in. You need to actually record enable the track you're going to. So here we go. I'm going to hit record enable. And let's do input monitoring just so we can double check that we're actually getting sound. There we go. Looks like our sample's hitting good. And you could go through and try to fix everything and then print. I'm just going to print and go. And if we see a spot where we need to fix something, then we can simply do that. All right, so I'm just going to hit record, and let's sample the track. All right, we're going to start about here, and here we go. Okay, as you can see, the sample worked really well. It doesn't always work that easily, you guys, but today it did. And what's interesting is as you go through, let me show you what the triggers look like. If I get right on a certain, any particular hit, let me activate my chapter transient there. And you come down here, look at drum rehab, it'll show me right where the trigger actually is, right here. And again, you can't really manipulate or move on the window here in drum rehab. You do it here in your edit window. So I'm going to come over here and click here. You can see where this trigger is, and it shows you the velocity or the decibel amount of where that trigger actually is. And if I want, I can hit ignore, and it will actually ignore that particular trigger. Or if I hit add, let's say it didn't actually trigger anything here, I could simply use tab the transient, get right on where the hit is, and then hit add, and Drum Rehab would actually add a trigger point there. So it allows you to do that, which is really nice. It's one of the only programs that actually allows you to change your trigger points. All right, so let's pretend that we did the whole track. We're good. Now we're going to remove Drum Rehab from the equation. And that's cool. And I want to be able to hear both of these guys now. And what we want to check for now is to make sure that both of our drum tracks are in phase and in time together. So let's check the phasing first, because some drum samples will not be in phase with the original. Now, if you're simply replacing the original, then that's fine. But as you can see here, my sample track is completely out of phase with the original. If I were trying to combine these together, I have to invert the phase of one of them. So let's pretend that we need to do that. So one way to do that is I'm going to highlight the entire sample track I just did. I'm going to head up to Audio Suite. I'm going to go to Other, and I'm going to hit Invert. And this will actually reverse the phase for me, or the polarity, or however you want to think about it. I'm going to hit Render. And if I come back and I've zoomed back in, you'll see that it put it in phase. It just simply flopped the phase for us. All right, so now I can actually play these together, and they can work either together as one kick drum, or I can simply use the replacement track. Okay, let me zoom in though. The other thing you want to check after you do this, you want to check and see how sample accurate it actually timed these things. As if you look here, it looks like it's close. We're within about 15 samples, which is actually great. Typically, the number of samples that occurs before you really hear a difference noticeably is about 100 samples. Some drummers say they can hear it about 50, but I don't know. I really challenge them on that. But about 100 samples is where you can really hear a noticeable difference. However, I do like things to be close. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to grab my sample track and simply just move it up a little bit to where these things are even closer together. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect. Again, if you're like 2 or 3 samples off, man, you'll never hear that. So now we're 4. And if I zoom out, let's see how accurate Drum Rehab is across the board. Let's just pick a random hit in the middle here. And we'll just go in and double check and see where this one is sitting. And as you can see, we're just about as close. About 4, that's about 10. Actually not bad at all, considering. So let's take a listen to it and make sure they sound okay together. Sounds great. Here's without our sample. It's the original. And here's with the sample. A lot more punch. Now, the other cool thing about using samples is that all that bleed you hear in the kick drum, usually people will gate that out. Well, if you get rid of the original and just use a sample, which we'll do now, all that bleed goes away. And all you have is a nice, clean kick drum. All right. So that is how we do sample replacing using Drum Rehab. Now let's use another method. This one is called Trigger. So I'm going to actually make a new playlist here. And what we're going to do is we're now going to use Trigger to accomplish the same goal. So Trigger is made by Slate Audio. It is another very good drum replacement program, and actually its library of sounds is amazing. Drum Rehab does not come with a library of sounds. It expects you to have your own. Trigger actually does have its own library of sounds, as well as letting you use your own amazing sounds that come with this thing. And you can get like crystal algae drums and all kinds of different things from Slate as like a sample pack. But anyway, what I want to show you how to do first is we need to get our sounds onto the computer itself and off my hard drive. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run over to my hard drive here, and I'm going to grab the sample that I want to use, and let's go to samples and sounds, and let's actually use, let's use something from my old dear friend Tom Tucker's library. I'm going to use the Vinny Itchy Kick. All right, and I'm actually going to drag this guy to the desktop of my computer. All right, so now it'll be easy for Trigger to find it. Trigger is a little difficult to navigate with. but not too bad. So again, in order to facilitate all this, I'm going to bus the output of the track I'm going to replace over here to the input of my new sample track. And let's go and load trigger. Trigger is under other. And there it is, trigger. We'll do mono. And again, trigger is by Slate Audio. Slate Audio makes some amazing, amazing products. Here it is. Now, trigger is a little different in that I can't add new trigger points and I can't take them away. I have to use my 3 knobs here in order to set my, basically my sensitivity, re-trigger, and detail. Honestly and truthfully, it's just a matter of manipulating these 3 knobs to get, it to trigger on the sound just the way you want. It does have a dynamic section, just like Drum Rehab does, and you can load up to 1, 2, 3, about up to 6 different samples and have them, triggering at different threshold amounts, that kind of thing, which is nice. Trigger also does other cool things. I believe it also will export the triggers as MIDI and that kind of thing. But today we're just going to simply replace the sound, okay? So let's load in our sound. I'm going to navigate to the desktop. Actually, let's go to users. And let's go to MMI student, who is the user of this particular computer. And let's go to that desktop. And there's our sample right there. Double click. And there it is. It has now been loaded in to trigger. And let's play the track through and see what we got here. All right, looks like we got some signal coming in. Now let's record, enable, and input monitor our sample track and make sure we can see that. And looks like we got some double triggers going on. So I'm actually going to turn re-trigger down a little bit so it doesn't double trigger. And it's still double triggering a little bit, so let's turn our sensitivity down just a little as well. Oh, still getting a little bit of that going on. Let's see. Sweet. All right. So like I said, it's just a matter of really going in and making sure that the sensitivity, the re-trigger, and the detail are all set appropriately. Depend on to make sure that you don't get any double hits or anything like that. So all that's going really good. Looks like we're ready to actually roll. And since we can't really control the actual trigger points, we'll just go through, and if we have any trouble, we'll stop and we'll see what happens. So let's go ahead and get rolling here. Looks like we had a double trigger right on the first one. Let's check that one more time. There we go. All right. Got that all settled, and so let's do it again. Recording. All right. Now, this particular program does have a little something that we can use to our advantage. Let's go ahead and check the phase real quick. Oh, and that's also really very late. Look at that. All right. Super, super late. Let me check and make sure delay compensation is actually off on Pro Tools here. It's actually on long. Let's actually let's turn this thing off for the moment. It looks like the sample will actually be properly in phase. So now that we've turned delay compensation off, let's actually make a new one. And let's try this again. And let's do it. All right. So now what I want to do is I want to go through. Let's take trigger off. And we are going to listen to our two kicks together. And let's set this one back to A1 and 2. Let's fly back over here. And let's again zoom in really close. Now trigger is a little bit off here as far as our sample thing goes. Now, just so you know, the trigger usually is not this far off. Any one of these programs at any given time can have some issues this way, kind of depending on, you know, the sample being used and the sample being manipulated, that kind of thing, okay? But it's really pretty easy to fix. You simply come to the start of the sample you're dealing with, and we'll just, yeah, see there, we're way off as far as that goes. So it's really easy to fix, though. So what we're going to do is I'm simply going to cut this track right here, and I'm simply going to move it over into where it needs to be. And we'll get them back close together. You know, a little bit of manual editing, you guys, happens a ton in this kind of work. No one program is always perfect. I've seen Drum Rehab be off as well. And now, with this case going on, we see that our samples are once again, the phase is a little off again here. So same thing I would do if I want to combine them together. I'm going to highlight it, go to Audio Suite, we'll come to Other, and we'll actually hit Invert. And we'll now invert the phase. And let's listen to these two guys together and see what happens. Sounds great, and here's just the trigger by itself. So it's nicely following the dynamics of the original. And one cool thing about trigger as well is that it is very consistent with itself. So for example, once we move that one track over, as you can see, we're actually not that far off there. And if I take and pick another hit, we're going to be about the same distance apart here. You know what I mean? So it's really, you know, really accurate. All you have to do is pretty much move the track once, and all of them will follow suit as far as, you know, how far off they are. Now, again, that was a little extreme for how trigger is usually off, or is as accurate as Drum Rehab is. So usually don't have to worry about that as much. But again, it's pretty easy to fix, even if you are, you know, up to that far. Like, it would think it's about 1,000 samples off, which is unusual. But as you can see, you can easily fix that. Okay, let's go through and use another method. So we're going to make a new track here. And let's use Avid's Sound Replacer. Now, Sound Replacer is an Audio Suite plugin. It requires you to actually make a selection. So let's make a selection. And let's go up to Audio Suite. Now, again, I've got a separate track created for the sample itself, which is something you need to have as well. Let's go up to Audio Suite. We're going to go to Other, and let's go to Sound Replacer. Sound Replacer, again, it's not real time, so you must use this without playback going on, and which means you cannot adjust any particular triggers or add or delete any. You got to set it all up before you go. It's a little clunkier, it's a little older, and not quite as accurate as the other two, but it still works. It comes free with ProTools, and if that's what you have, you need to learn how to, get a handle on it. So we've got 3 zones here to load in samples. You can do a soft, a medium, and a loud, and they're represented by these little flags. And as you can see, they are actually constrained to each other. I can't go past one from the other. And that way, that allows you to do, again, as you set your soft, your medium, and your loud, you have up to 3 samples. So let's load up a sample. I'm going to come to my little disk drive here and click on it. And I'm going to load up a sample from my hard drive again. So for this one, let's go to Samples and Sounds. Let's use our DW24 kick. So that has now been loaded in to this first flag. And let's be sure that we send our sample, once it's done, to the proper tracks. You see how this one down here says no track selected. We're going to choose our kick sample there. Okay. So now anything that we do once we process, we'll go to this kick sample track here. And it's already got my selection in here, so let's hit update. And what I need to do is I need to use these little cursor things to zoom out so I can see everything. There it is. And then I'm going to pull down my first threshold flag until I see everything light up. And again, what's cool about this with the 3 different flags is I can pull this one down to get all the lowest ones. Then I can pull the red one down to get the medium ones. And then I can pull the blue one down just to get the very high ones. And so that way I can do 3 different sounds if I want to. But since today I'm only doing one, I'm only going to pull this one down to trigger the sounds I'm actually looking to really get. And I pull it down to make sure they're all lit up yellow, which looks like they are. This also has a dynamics thing. If you're using just one, it'll follow the dynamics of how the drummer played, at least to an extent. So we have that set. Let's hit render. And we have sampled the kick drum. All right, let's go in and see exactly how accurate this bad boy is. And we're going to go down here, and sound replacer is actually not looking too bad. It looks like it's a little early, which is interesting. By a couple of samples there, it's early by 12 there. Let's spot check a little bit. Let's come back over here and see where this one is lying. And this one is at about 17. And let's check this one here. So sound replay. Oh, this one's actually late by about 35. So the problem with sound replacer is it's not necessarily consistent all the way through. So you would actually need to come through and check each one and move each one. That's always been my experience with sound replacer. There are some other ways you can do this. You can actually cut what we call cutting triggers, where you can cut the audio from the original and use that as a means to make sound replacer a little bit more accurate. But with all the new things you can do today, I'm not going to really worry about that. But again, you can go through each one of these, and I would check each one after using sound replacer and make sure they're all close. Let's check our phase real quick, see how that's running. It looks like the phase is actually really good. So the majority of these are a little ahead, but not too bad. Let's play it together, though, and see what it sounds like if we combine the two together. All right, and here's just the sample. And here's just the original. Okay, so not too bad. I would still go through and check each one and make sure they're all, exactly lined up right, cut them as you need to do, and that kind of thing. But it didn't do too bad. So those are the 3 main programs we use. Now what I want to do is I want to show you the way to do this manually. And for that, we're going to use a floor tom. So I'm going to hide and make the kick inactive. Let's bring our floor tom track back up. Make him active. Let's hide our kick sample track. Okay, let's make a new floor tom sample track. There it is in all its glory. Now, I'm going to show you the manual method for doing this, okay? So there's a couple of things to this. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to import some audio. I'm going to import a floor tom sample I really like. All right, so let's import audio. I'm actually going to go to my hard drive, and let's find this one right here, and let's go to, let's do some of these. Let's run on down to a nice floor tom sample. Let's use this DW right here. We're going to convert it into our session. And there she is. Now the first thing I want to do, because I'm doing this all kind of raw and manual like, I need to adjust the beginning and the end of my sample. As you can see, if I zoom all the way out, there's a little bit of an intro, so I'm going to delete that, make sure that that's out. And I'm going to add a very minuscule fade to this, just so it's, we don't get anything weird, clicks or pops from the audio, that kind of thing. All right, now I need to cut the end of this guy too. The reason I need to cut the end of this sample, you guys, is because it's probably going to be too long. Usually most toms in a drum kit don't ring out that long, okay? Where this one is going to ring out pretty long. So let me hit solo, we'll listen to it. That's way too long of a ring, you know, especially in the middle of a song where things are moving fast. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut the tail of it a little bit. Simply select, delete, and then I'm going to make a fade. And I prefer equal gain, and this is more natural sounding in my mind anyway. See what this sounds like. Maybe a little too short. Let's trim it back out just a little bit. Let's see what this sounds like. Perfect. All right, let's consolidate. And the quick key is Shift Option 3. Now we've got our new sample. Perfect. All right, let's leave the sample for the moment and let's talk about cutting. So here's my floor tom track, the original. And as you can see, it's got a ton of bleed floating around, which can make our life really hard. And especially if you're going to use drum rehab or trigger sound replacer, it's really good to go through your toms and actually cut out where the actual tom hits are, because you have all this bleed from like the snare drum and other instruments like that. It's really good to go through and just cut triggers, as we call it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen really carefully for when the tom actually hits, like right there. And so what I would go through and do is I'm going to cut around that hit, and there we go. And then I'm going to delete everything else that's not a tom hit. And you would go through the entire track. You can kind of look through, listen through, and make sure that what you're getting are actually floor tom hits. Those are rack tom hits bleeding through. There's a good one. All right, and again, I'm simply going to cut right up to it. Delete everything else in between. And if I'm going to be sample replacing it, I don't need to worry about its length. For example, that's fine. Now, if I were going to actually use these original toms, this is a little side note. If I wanted to use the sound of these toms, let's say I recorded them really well, I would actually edit this different. So what I would do is I would cut a little closer, I would fade it in, and then I would let it last a little longer, depending on how long it needs to go. Typically, you see where that kick drum hits right there. You can actually see it. I would probably trim back out there, and then I'd probably fade that out just a little bit right there, and I could actually use that as my actual tom. And if you listen to that with the whole drum kit, you won't hear it as being cut. It's almost like, I call it manual gating, because a lot of times a gate can be a little inaccurate, especially if you have really a guy who plays really a lot of soft hits on his drums. It's hard for a gate to keep up with all that. So it's really easy for you to come in and manually do it yourself and just edit those tom hits out and make sure they've got enough length of sustain and a good attack. And you can do all that yourself with phase. It takes a little longer, but with good quick keys and edit techniques, you can actually move that through that pretty quick. Okay, so what I've done is as I'm going through, I've cut a couple of these. I'd like to find, if I could, a nice roll. Here we go, right here. All right, that's a great one. So this way I can show you how we use clip gain to work on our volume and that kind of thing. All right, so let's say I've got my whole tom track done. Now I'm going to go through and I want to sample replace this. So the first thing I need to do is copy my sample to the clipboard. So let's highlight it. I'm going to hit Command C. And then let's actually run over here to let's work on just this whole fill here. And let's sample replace these. Okay, so ProTools has a little quirk when you're doing copying and pasting, whereas the track that I'm actually copying or pasting to, I want to put that above the track that I'm working with here. So what I'm trying to, I'm sorry, I'm a little trouble saying this. What I'm trying to say is, if I have my cursor across two tracks like this, and I hit paste, it will only paste on the topmost track. Let me say that again. If I have my cursor on a track and I hit shift and I add that cursor to the track above it, ProTools will not paste to the bottom, it will only paste to the top. So for example, I've copied my floor tom sample into the clipboard. So what I want to do is I want to go to each of these hits, use my tab to transient in order to get close, and then let's zoom really close in, because with toms, you guys, you want to be as accurate as you can. especially if you have a drummer who does a lot of tom fills, such as gospel and anything, or triplet kind of feels or fills. Geez, that kind of thing. You want to be right on top of it. And a lot of times the replacement programs just aren't accurate enough for me. So I've got the cursor right at the beginning of the transient of the first hit, but hold down Shift and click on the track above. And when I hit paste, which is Command V, as you can see, it only pastes the sample right above, but it didn't actually paste it on the track below, which is great because you still need to see these in order to do your next hits. So let's get in close and do the next one. And again, you can start moving really fast with this once you get your quick key flow down and that kind of thing. So I'm simply going to paste these on top like this. And we go through and do this kind of stuff first, okay? And then we'll go back and we'll adjust volumes after we're done. So pasting them on top. And then we'll do this side over here. All right, and again, you want to be sure you get nice and close on those transients. Make sure you get your tom fills right where they were meant to be played. And again, toms are actually one of the hardest things to do because of the bleed that you incur on the tracks when you're recording your drums. While I'm doing this, another good thing to keep in mind is that you may want to, once the drummer is done recording your record, or maybe even before he starts, is record samples of the drum kit he's actually playing. Those make the best samples to use because one of the things that makes samples sound like samples is that they don't sound like a kit. You know, you might use, DW toms, you might use a Yamaha snare and a Slingerland kick drum. But what's really interesting is that none of those instruments sound alike. They don't sound like they're part of the same drum kit. So a lot of times making sure that your samples are either all part of the same drum kit or that, again, you can even record samples of the drum kit the drummer's playing on the record. And that will actually also match the sound of the drums in the overheads as well, which is really important. And also, if your drummer is using a 10, a 12, and a 16, you want to be sure to use the same size toms as well because that will sound weird in the overheads. Because the overheads, you'll hear 10, 12, and 16, but if you use, a 12, 14, and a 16, those things won't match at all. All right, so we've got our samples in the right place, but as you can see, the volumes are way different, whereas our sample up here is going to sound like a shotgun, right? And the original sounds like this. He's definitely got some dynamics going on. So I'm actually going to use clip gain, which you can see by these little faders here, to actually give our samples some dynamics. So the loudest one, I'm going to keep it 0, and I'm going to pull this one down maybe to about 7 or 8. And then I'm going to pull this one down to maybe about 12 or so. And now if we listen to the sample itself, it'll feel a little bit more natural. Just like that. And then let's do the same over here on this side. Let's see, we're going to keep this last one at the height. Let's pull this one down maybe to about 7. We'll pull this one down to about 9. Let's pull this one down to about 10 or 11. We'll pull this one down, I don't know, let's maybe go down to 12. And again, you want to have a good amount of difference between at least 2 or 3 dB in between each one. You know what I'm saying? Let's even go up just a little bit there. Maybe it went a little too far. Sweet. And you can see that definitely gives it a more realistic feel. Okay? And so that's the deal with manual sound replacing. It's actually the most accurate. But one thing you really want to keep in mind is you want to be sure that you're using your clip gain or some other kind of automation to make sure you have some dynamics. That way they're not all the same, because they can definitely sound like a shotgun or machine gun or whatever. Also, you can use multiple samples. So if you have a kick drum or a snare drum, let's say, with a loud, a medium, and a soft hit, I would actually go through the entire track if I'm doing it manually, and I would say I would use the hardest, floor tom hit, on the transients over here that are loud. Then I would use a medium hit on this one and maybe a softer hit on this one, and actually paste those in accordingly. So I would go through and do, all my hard hits and then all my soft hits, and I would do those manually as well. So different things to keep in mind. So again, these are the four main methods used right now for most of your sound replacing. Typically, I personally do kick and toms. I replace them pretty religiously, or at least combine them. The snare drum, I usually don't replace at all, or I might replace just the backbeats because a lot of snare drums play ghost notes and that kind of thing, which are really hard to or impossible even to sample replace. Another thing you can keep in mind is on the snare drum, maybe when your drummer is you're recording samples with him, have him hit the snare drum with both the left and the right hand and sample both. And when you're replacing a snare roll, use left and right alternating, and that'll also help it sound more real. All right, thanks for listening. I'm Brian Snowman Powers. I hope this was helpful, and we'll have some more for you soon.